The night was quiet, the streets mostly empty, and the hum of the city felt distant and calm. A young woman was driving home after a long day at work, her mind preoccupied with tasks left undone and errands that still needed attention. She was tired, her eyes flicking to the clock every few minutes, watching the hours pass. The dashboard lights reflected softly on her face, highlighting the fatigue in her eyes and the tension in her shoulders. She had been looking forward to reaching home, to the comfort of her small apartment and the quiet relief of being alone. As she drove, she thought about the day, how demanding it had been, how many people she had interacted with, and how little time she had had for herself. Her thoughts wandered, and for a brief moment she didn't notice the traffic light ahead turn red. By the time she realized it, she had already crossed the intersection. The sudden realization sent a jolt of panic through her. She knew the law, she knew what should have happened, and she also knew that running a red light was dangerous and could get her into serious trouble. Her heart raced as she braced for the consequences, hoping that no one had seen her mistake. Before she could fully process the incident, she noticed the flashing lights in her rearview mirror. A police car had pulled her over, its presence commanding and authoritative. She immediately pulled to the side of the road, her hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. The engine was still running, but her body felt frozen in a mix of fear and apprehension. She could feel her pulse thudding in her chest as she took a deep breath and reached for her license and registration. Every instinct told her to stay calm, to be polite, and to hope that the officer would understand. The officer approached, his footsteps purposeful, the light from his flashlight cutting through the darkness. He was professional, observant, and thorough in his approach. When he finally spoke, his voice was firm but not harsh. He asked for her license and registration and inquired about why she had run the red light. She answered politely, her voice soft but clear, apologizing for the mistake and explaining that she had been tired and momentarily distracted. She looked at him directly, her eyes sincere, and hoped that he could see the truth in her words. There was a brief silence as he studied her face, observing the fatigue, the honesty, and the subtle nervousness that accompanied her explanation. He noticed her calm demeanor despite the situation, the way she maintained composure even when she could have been shaken. Her politeness and apparent innocence made him pause. He had seen many traffic stops like this, many excuses, many apologies, but there was something different about this young woman. Something in her voice and her expression seemed genuine and disarming. He asked her a few more questions, making sure he understood the situation. She responded clearly, without hesitation, answering every question honestly and respectfully. Her tone was steady even as her heart raced. She explained that she had been working late, that she was fatigued, and that she had simply made a mistake. There was no defiance, no argument, no attempt to evade responsibility. She owned the error and expressed genuine concern for safety, both hers and that of others on the road. The officer continued to study her. He noticed her appearance, her presence, and the grace in the way she conducted herself. He noticed the politeness in her words, the quiet dignity and the sincerity in her eyes. She seemed aware of the seriousness of the situation, yet she handled it with a calmness that surprised him. For a moment, he considered how often people in his line of work reacted with anger, defensiveness, or fear. This young woman was different. There was an undeniable charm and authenticity to her behavior that made him hesitate. He thought about the consequences she could face for running the red light. A ticket would be the standard procedure, a warning often overlooked in favor of enforcing the law strictly. But there was a hesitation in his mind. He weighed her behavior, her demeanor, and the overall situation. The night was quiet. No other vehicles were at risk, and there was no immediate danger. He found himself questioning whether issuing a ticket was necessary in this particular moment. He recognized her honesty and the respect she had shown throughout the encounter. There was a part of him that was swayed by more than just her words, the way she carried herself, the subtle confidence in her posture, and the kindness in her eyes. He decided to give her a chance. He chose to let her off with a warning instead of writing a ticket. He explained the seriousness of running a red light, emphasizing the danger it could pose, and reminded her to be careful in the future. She nodded attentively, her gratitude clear in her expression. She thanked him sincerely, not just with words but with a small genuine smile that conveyed relief and appreciation. The officer felt a mix of satisfaction and surprise at how such a simple interaction could have such an impact. As she drove away, he watched her taillights disappear into the night, her figure growing smaller in the distance. He remained on the roadside reflecting on the encounter. There was something remarkable about how she had handled the situation, the way she had balanced politeness with honesty, and the way her presence had affected him personally. He realized that in his years on the force, he had rarely encountered someone who could command attention and influence outcomes simply through demeanor and composure. For the young woman, the drive home was a mix of relief and lingering anxiety. She had escaped what could have been a stressful and costly situation, but the memory of the flashing lights and the officer's serious demeanor stayed with her. She reflected on how easily a moment could have gone differently, how a small mistake had the potential to escalate, and how a calm and sincere approach had made all the difference. She felt a quiet gratitude that the encounter had ended peacefully and with understanding. The next morning, the officer arrived at the station with a lingering thought in his mind. The previous night's encounter replayed in his head, the way she had looked, the way she had spoken, and the calmness she carried even in the face of authority. He had thought it was just another traffic stop, one of countless he had conducted over the years, yet something about her had stuck. As he pored over reports and processed other routine tasks, a message came across his desk about a string of local thefts. The details were brief, but one thing stood out. The description of a suspect seemed to match the woman he had let off the hook the night before. At first, he could not believe it. Surely, the polite, composed woman he had met could not be involved in criminal activity. The thought seemed absurd, almost impossible. He closed his eyes briefly and replayed the encounter again in his mind, recalling her gentle voice, her careful explanations, and the way she had apologized sincerely. Her innocence had seemed obvious, yet here was a report suggesting otherwise. His professional instincts told him to investigate further, but his personal impressions conflicted with the possibility that she could be guilty. He began quietly gathering information. He went back over the incident report, noting the time, location, and circumstances. He cross-referenced it with the theft reports, checking locations, times, and patterns. Each piece of information seemed to align in small, unsettling ways. The woman's car, the area she frequented, the hours she drove, all could connect to the recent thefts. Still, his mind refused to reconcile the woman he had met with the image of a criminal. He wrestled with disbelief, curiosity, and the nagging sense that appearances could be deceptive. Meanwhile, the woman carried on with her life, unaware of the officer's growing unease. She moved through her days with routine, going to work, interacting with friends, and running errands. Everything appeared normal, yet beneath the surface she was hiding more than a simple traffic mistake. Her life was complicated, filled with challenges and secrets that shaped her actions in ways others could not immediately understand. She maintained her polite, composed exterior, skillfully managing the way she was perceived by others. Her beauty and charm allowed her to navigate situations that might have been risky or uncomfortable for someone less confident. Back at the station, the officer followed up with local residents and businesses. He discreetly asked about recent suspicious activity and inquired if anyone had noticed a woman matching her description. Some people mentioned seeing someone matching the description near the locations of the thefts, but the details were vague. He began to feel a mix of frustration and intrigue, realizing that the situation was far more complex than he had initially thought. His initial impression of her was being challenged by the evidence he was uncovering. Security footage became another crucial piece of the puzzle. The officer reviewed footage from local stores and streets near the reported thefts. At first, the recordings were unclear, showing only glimpses of a figure moving quickly and efficiently, avoiding detection. Then, there were moments when the footage suggested a resemblance to the woman from the previous night. Her gestures, her posture, even the way she walked seemed familiar. The officer leaned closer to the screen, feeling a growing tension. Could the person he had let go so easily be involved in something more serious? The thought unsettled him deeply. He also spoke with colleagues who had investigated similar cases. Some advised caution, warning him not to jump to conclusions based on appearance or assumption. Others suggested that the evidence should be treated seriously, reminding him that anyone could commit a crime regardless of how charming or composed they appeared. The officer felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on him. He had let her go, influenced by her demeanor. and now he faced the possibility that his judgment might have allowed criminal activity to continue. As he delved deeper, he also noticed inconsistencies in his own memory. He remembered her smile, her calm voice, and her polite gestures, but he also started to see patterns in the way she had answered his questions, patterns that could suggest awareness and strategic behavior. Had she been intentionally presenting herself as harmless, or was he reading too much into minor details? The uncertainty gnawed at him, creating a tension that grew with each passing day. Meanwhile, the woman carried out her routine with an ease that contrasted sharply with the officer's turmoil. She went shopping, attended meetings, and visited friends, all while maintaining an aura of normalcy. Her ability to appear ordinary, to blend in, and to act with confidence made her seem entirely unconnected to the incidents the officer was investigating. Yet every choice she made was deliberate, calculated, and aware of the scrutiny that could come if her activities were noticed. She navigated the world with intelligence, charm, and a keen sense of timing, managing risk while appearing completely harmless. The officer felt conflicted. Part of him wanted to approach her directly, to ask questions, to confront what he suspected. Another part of him hesitated, concerned about the consequences of accusing someone without absolute proof. He struggled with the balance between professional duty and personal impression, between evidence and intuition. Each time he saw her in public or recalled her face from the previous night, he felt a mix of recognition and doubt. The more he investigated, the more he realized how easily appearances could deceive. As the days passed, small details began to add up. A store clerk recalled seeing a woman matching her description near the time of a theft. A passerby remembered a figure moving quickly down an alleyway, her movements precise and controlled. These fragments, when pieced together, began to form a pattern that mirrored the times and locations of the reported thefts. The officer's suspicion grew, tempered by the persistent image of the polite, calm woman he had met on the street. The conflict between perception and reality became almost unbearable. The tension in the officer's mind grew with each passing day. Every new detail about the thefts, every witness statement, and every piece of security footage seemed to point toward the young woman he had let go just nights before. At the same time, his memory of her politeness, her calm demeanor, and the subtle charm that had influenced his initial decision made it hard for him to fully believe she could be involved. He was caught in a conflict between professional duty and personal impression, between evidence and intuition, and it weighed heavily on him. He decided it was time to approach the investigation more actively. He began to follow patterns more carefully, noting the times and locations of each reported theft. Each clue was small, a fleeting figure on a camera, a witness who remembered a glimpse of a car, a brief description of someone carrying stolen goods. But together they started to form a coherent picture. He noted that some of the places where thefts had occurred were near routes the young woman had traveled. The thought gnawed at him. Could it really be her? How could someone so composed and seemingly innocent be responsible? Meanwhile, the young woman continued her daily life without a hint of worry. She went to work, ran errands, and visited friends, moving through the city with ease. Her confidence and charm helped her navigate social interactions smoothly. She knew people often judged quickly, and she used that perception to her advantage, making sure to appear ordinary and harmless. Her calm composure in public contrasted with the hidden complexity of her private activities, and she carefully managed every detail to avoid drawing attention. The officer spoke to colleagues quietly, hoping to gather more information without alarming anyone. He reviewed reports, examined camera footage, and visited locations connected to the thefts. Each time he thought he might have a clear lead, he was reminded of her innocence in his memory. He recalled her voice, the way she had apologized sincerely, and the respectful tone she had maintained throughout the traffic stop. The conflict between evidence and memory created a constant tension, leaving him unsure of how to proceed. He also spoke to people who knew her casually, shopkeepers, neighbors, and friends, without revealing his suspicions. Most described her as polite, friendly, and reliable, someone who would not seem capable of criminal activity. This only added to his internal struggle. The image of the woman he had met contrasted sharply with the emerging evidence of possible thefts. He began to consider the possibility that appearances could be deceiving and that human behavior was more complex than it appeared at first glance. At home, The officer spent hours analyzing the information he had collected. He looked for patterns, inconsistencies, and motives, trying to reconcile what he saw with what he remembered. He questioned his own judgment, wondering if he had been too easily swayed by charm and beauty. The thought that he might have let a criminal go haunted him. He felt the weight of responsibility pressing down, knowing that a careful approach was required to avoid mistakes or unnecessary accusations. Meanwhile, the young woman carried on with a delicate balance of ordinary life and calculated caution. She made sure her movements were predictable yet unremarkable, so as not to attract attention. She was aware that people might be watching, but she maintained a calm exterior, managing risk while accomplishing her goals. Each day was a careful dance of routine and subtle strategy, blending seamlessly into the world around her, while keeping her private actions hidden from view. The officer intensified his investigation, visiting locations late at night to observe activity firsthand. He paid attention to timing, patterns, and behavior, noting small details that could confirm or disprove his suspicions. The more he investigated, the more the evidence seemed to align, and yet he could not shake the memory of her calm politeness, the sincerity in her voice, and the way she had handled the traffic stop. The contradiction left him conflicted, unsure whether to trust the evidence, his intuition, or both. One evening, he received a tip from a store clerk who had noticed someone matching her description behaving oddly near the scene of a theft. The clerk's observations were vague but consistent with the timeline of reported incidents. The officer decided he needed to see for himself. He followed the path described, staying in the shadows and observing the area without revealing his presence. Hours passed and he saw a figure moving with a deliberate, careful gait, her movements precise and controlled yet casual enough to appear ordinary. Every gesture seemed to confirm what he had begun to suspect, and yet every detail reminded him of the young woman's calm demeanor from the traffic stop. He began to consider motives. Why would someone so polite and charming be involved in thefts? Was there a personal or moral reason behind her actions? Was it possible that she was helping someone, covering an urgent need, or acting out of desperation rather than malice? These questions haunted him. The more he speculated, the more complex the situation became. He realized that understanding her motives might be as important as uncovering the facts themselves. The young woman, aware of the risks, took precaution. The officer spent the next few days preparing for the confrontation carefully. He reviewed every detail of his investigation, double-checked timelines, and ensured he had enough evidence to approach the young woman without creating unnecessary complications. Each step he planned was deliberate, designed to maintain professionalism while addressing the growing suspicion he had about her involvement in the thefts. Despite the tension, he reminded himself to remain calm, careful, and observant. On the evening he chose to act, the city was quiet again. Streetlights cast long shadows along the sidewalks, and the hum of passing cars felt distant. He found her at a small cafe she frequented, a place that seemed ordinary and safe, yet he knew that the encounter could quickly turn serious. He approached her cautiously, making sure to maintain a balance of authority and discretion. She noticed him immediately, her eyes widening slightly, though her posture remained composed. There was no fear, no panic, only a subtle recognition that something significant was about to happen. He greeted her, keeping his tone professional but steady. She returned the greeting with a calm, polite smile, her demeanor unchanged by his presence. He observed her closely, noting how her composure remained intact, how her eyes held a clarity that made him pause. It was as if she had anticipated this moment and had prepared herself for it. Yet there was no aggression, no defensiveness. He felt a mixture of frustration and intrigue, uncertain of what to expect next. He began to ask questions, starting with neutral topics, then gradually moving toward the purpose of his approach. She listened attentively, responding thoughtfully and without hesitation. Her answers were measured, calm, and confident, reflecting a careful awareness of both the situation and the potential consequences. The officer found himself struggling to reconcile the growing evidence against her with the composed, seemingly harmless person in front of him. The contradiction was unsettling, making every word and gesture feel weighty with significance. As the conversation continued, he noticed subtle signs of intelligence and awareness in her responses. She did not panic, did not flinch, and did not attempt to evade his questions. Instead, she provided answers that were honest yet framed in a way that required careful consideration. He realized that she was aware of his suspicions and that every word she spoke was deliberate, designed to convey a certain message without revealing too much. Her calmness became a challenge, forcing him to navigate the conversation carefully and to remain composed himself. Finally, he asked directly about the thefts. There was a brief pause, and her expression shifted slightly. Not fear, but thoughtfulness. She explained her actions, revealing motives that the officer had not anticipated. Her involvement was not driven by selfishness or malice, but by circumstances that required difficult choices. Perhaps she had acted to help someone in urgent need, or to cover a situation that demanded immediate attention. The explanation was surprising, forcing him to reconsider everything he had assumed based on evidence alone. He listened closely, taking in every detail. Her words painted a picture of a complex individual facing challenging circumstances. He realized that the neat categories of right and wrong, innocent and guilty, were insufficient to understand the situation fully. There were nuances, motivations, and personal circumstances that complicated the narrative. He felt a mixture of relief, confusion, and admiration as he processed her explanation, recognizing the humanity behind her actions. The conversation continued, exploring the details of her motives, her planning, and her careful execution. She spoke with honesty and clarity, emphasizing that her actions had been necessary, deliberate, and measured. He began to see her not as a criminal in the traditional sense, but as someone navigating extraordinary circumstances with intelligence, composure, and strategic thinking. The story she revealed challenged his assumptions, reshaping his perception of character, morality, and the influence of appearances. He asked questions to clarify specifics, to understand timelines, locations, and intentions. She responded fully, demonstrating not only honesty but also a sense of responsibility and awareness of consequences. Her calmness remained consistent, and he realized that her demeanor had been genuine, not manipulative. The earlier impression he had formed during the traffic stop, of politeness, composure, and charm, was not an act but a reflection of her true nature. Her actions were complex, but her character was consistent. Throughout the discussion, he noticed the subtle ways she influenced the conversation. Her calm voice, her deliberate gestures, and her clear explanations created a sense of control without dominance. He felt the impact of her presence, recognizing the strength it took to face a confrontation with honesty and dignity. It became clear that her ability to navigate tense situations was a core part of her character, and that this strength had shaped the outcome of the traffic stop and now this conversation. He reflected on his own assumptions. He realized that his initial impressions, influenced by charm and beauty, had been both a limitation and a guide. They had caused him to hesitate, to question the simplicity of evidence, and to remain observant and cautious. In a way, his personal reaction had led him to approach the investigation with care, ultimately allowing him to understand the complexity of her actions and motives. He recognized the interplay between perception, judgment, and reality, and how easy it was to make assumptions based on appearances alone. The woman explained the context of her actions, providing insight into challenges she faced and the difficult choices she had made. Her honesty and thoughtfulness illuminated aspects of human behavior that were often overlooked. She did not seek to justify wrongdoing lightly, but to communicate the reasons behind her decisions, highlighting the nuance and moral complexity of the situation. The officer listened, absorbing the explanation and gradually understanding the bro. After their conversation, the officer felt a mixture of relief and reflection. The woman's explanation had been unexpected, revealing motives that were not selfish or harmful in the conventional sense. She had acted under unusual circumstances, driven by urgency and moral complexity rather than simple criminal intent. The officer understood that while evidence suggested wrongdoing, the reality of human behavior was rarely so simple. This understanding left him with a sense of clarity, but also a deep respect for her intelligence, composure, and ability to navigate complex situations. In the following days, the officer reported his findings and recommendations, carefully outlining the context, motives, and circumstances behind the woman's actions. His superiors were surprised by the detailed account and the insight it offered into a situation that could have been misunderstood. The report emphasized that the woman's behavior, while unconventional, had been driven by necessity and displayed remarkable composure under scrutiny. This documentation would later serve as a reference point for understanding similar cases where human motives were layered and nuanced. The woman continued her daily life, but the encounter had left a mark on both her and the officer. She moved with her usual grace and confidence, aware that she had been closely observed, yet had maintained control over her narrative. Her ability to remain calm, composed, and polite had allowed her to navigate the tension successfully, reinforcing her awareness of human perception and the importance of appearance in influencing outcomes. She reflected on the encounter as a lesson in strategy, human psychology, and the delicate balance between honesty and discretion. For the officer, the experience reshaped his understanding of human behavior, perception, and judgment. He realized that appearances could be misleading and that composure, intelligence, and moral complexity often intersected in unexpected ways. The encounter served as a reminder that enforcement of the law required both diligence and empathy, a willingness to understand context and motivation, and a recognition that humans are rarely purely good or bad. The memory of her calm demeanor, polite words, and strategic responses would remain a reference point in his professional life. In time, the situation became a story among colleagues, not as gossip but as a lesson in judgment, perception, and the complexities of human behavior. The officer recounted the events carefully, highlighting the woman's intelligence, composure, and moral reasoning. The story served as a reminder that encounters with individuals could never be reduced to simple assumptions, and that understanding human motives often required patience, observation, and reflection. Meanwhile, the woman reflected on her own growth. She had faced the possibility of confrontation, scrutiny, and judgment, yet had navigated the situation with grace and strategy. The experience reinforced her confidence, her awareness of others' perceptions, and her ability to balance ordinary appearances with deliberate actions. She understood that life was full of unexpected encounters, and that composure, intelligence, and honesty could shape outcomes in significant ways. The events had tested her, but also affirmed her capacity to manage complexity successfully. Months later, both the officer and the woman encountered each other again, though in a casual public setting. There was recognition, a subtle acknowledgement of the shared experience, but no tension or conflict. Their interaction was polite, calm, and respectful, reflecting the understanding and growth that had come from the earlier events. The officer had a renewed sense of professional perspective, while the woman carried a reinforced awareness of her own abilities and the influence of character and composure on human interactions. The story became a quiet lesson for both, a moment that highlighted the unpredictable nature of life and human behavior. A simple traffic stop had led to an investigation, a confrontation, and ultimately understanding and reflection. It underscored the importance of patience, observation, and empathy in judgment, as well as the subtle but powerful role of composure, intelligence, and honesty in influencing outcomes. For the officer, the experience shaped his approach to future situations, reminding him to balance evidence with intuition and to consider context and human motives carefully. He carried the memory of the young woman's calm demeanor, strategic thinking, and moral reasoning as a benchmark for understanding complex human behavior. For the woman, the experience affirmed her ability to navigate challenges successfully, balancing risk, discretion, and composure to achieve outcomes without unnecessary conflict. Ultimately, the events left a lasting impression on both. What began as a moment of apparent chance, a simple traffic stop influenced by charm and beauty, evolved into a story of human complexity, moral reasoning, and the unexpected ways appearances can shape perception. The officer learned the limits of assumptions, the importance of context, and the subtle influence of human character. The woman learned the power of composure, honesty, and intelligence in navigating challenging situations. The incident faded from public attention, but the lessons endured. Both the officer and the woman carried the experience with them, a quiet acknowledgement of the unexpected impact of human interactions. It served as a reminder that life is often more complex than it appears, that judgment requires understanding, and that human behavior, while unpredictable, can be understood through careful observation, empathy, and reflection. In the end, both returned to their routines but with new perspectives. The officer approached his work with a renewed awareness of nuance and human complexity, while the woman moved through her life with confidence in her ability to navigate challenges. Their shared experience remained a silent testament to the subtle, profound lessons that can emerge from unexpected encounters where perception, judgment, and character intersect in ways that surprise, enlighten, and endure. Aider picture. By the end of their conversation, the officer felt a shift in perspective. What had begun as a situation filled with suspicion and doubt had transformed into a moment of clarity and understanding. He realized that the young woman's actions, while unconventional, were guided by circumstance, necessity, and intelligence. His perception of her as a simple, polite driver had expanded into recognition of her strategic thinking, moral complexity, and composure under pressure. The confrontation concluded with a mutual acknowledgement of the complexities involved. The officer, while responsible for enforcing the law, recognized the need to consider context, motives, and human factors. The young woman in turn demonstrated her awareness, responsibility, and calm composure. The interaction left both with a deeper understanding of judgment, perception, and the unexpected ways people navigate challenging circumstances. As the night ended and they parted ways, both carried the impact of the encounter with them. The officer returned to his duties with a renewed perspective, aware of how easily assumptions could mislead, and how important context and human understanding were in judgment. The young woman continued her life with an affirmation of her ability to manage risk, navigate complexity, and maintain composure even in confrontations. The events of the past days, beginning with a simple traffic stop, had unfolded into a complex narrative of human behavior, moral complexity, and perception. Both had been challenged, tested, and ultimately enlightened by the experience. The story of the encounter, the investigation, and the confrontation served as a reminder that appearances could deceive, that human motives were often layered, and that composure, honesty, and intelligence could influence outcomes in ways that were both surprising and profound. For the officer, the memory of her composure and explanation would remain with him, shaping his approach to future situations and influencing his understanding of human behavior. For the young woman, the encounter reinforced her ability to navigate challenges, balance appearance and reality, and face authority with dignity and strategy. The night had revealed truths about both of them, truths that were unexpected, enlightening, and lasting, setting the stage for the final resolution that would conclude this unusual and captivating story. Tie-ins. She avoided patterns that could make her predictable, checked her surroundings, and remained calm under scrutiny. Her beauty and composure continued to influence people around her, allowing her to navigate potentially risky situations with ease. She maintained an ordinary appearance, spoke politely, and acted in ways that reinforced the impression of harmlessness. Each interaction was carefully managed to avoid suspicion, while maintaining a sense of normal life. Back at the station, the officer worked late into the night, analyzing footage and reviewing reports. Each new detail seemed to pull him in conflicting directions. Evidence pointed one way, personal impressions another. He replayed the traffic stop in his mind, questioning whether he had been too lenient, too influenced by charm, too willing to overlook protocol. The doubt lingered, pressing on him as he prepared to take the next steps in the investigation. He knew that careful planning and strategic action were essential to uncovering the truth without making mistakes or assumptions that could backfire. The tension built steadily as he monitored her movements and behavior. He noticed subtle changes, small actions that suggested awareness and intelligence in her decisions. Every detail he observed added to the mystery, reinforcing the idea that she was more complex than he had first imagined. Her calm, composed exterior hid a sharp mind and a careful approach to risk, and he realized that understanding her actions would require both observation and insight. Finally, after days of careful surveillance, pattern recognition, and quiet investigation, he began to feel he had enough information to approach her. He planned the confrontation carefully, considering timing, location, and method. He wanted to ensure that the situation could be resolved safely and professionally, while also accounting for the unpredictable nature of human behavior. The memory of her beauty, composure, and politeness remained strong in his mind, creating a sense of anticipation, tension, and curiosity about how the encounter would unfold. The young woman continued her daily life, unaware of the officer's growing focus on her actions. She moved confidently through her routine, balancing ordinary appearances with the careful execution of her private objectives. Each day was a mix of vigilance and calm, planning and spontaneity, maintaining a balance that allowed her to navigate both her personal and public life. Her beauty, composure, and intelligence continued to influence the perceptions of those around her, shaping interactions and guiding outcomes in subtle but powerful ways. The story had moved far beyond a simple traffic stop. What had begun as a minor incident had evolved into a complex web of observation, suspicion, and human behavior. The officer faced a decision that would test both his professional judgment and his perception of character, while the young woman navigated the delicate balance of maintaining her composure and managing her private actions. Both were poised on the edge of a confrontation that promised to reveal truth, challenge assumptions, and redefine understanding in ways neither could yet fully anticipate. He began to question his own judgment. Had he let personal impressions cloud his professional responsibility? Could beauty, charm, and composure have influenced him more than the facts? The thought was unsettling, and he found himself replaying the traffic stop repeatedly, analyzing every word, gesture, and pause. He questioned whether he had made a mistake by letting her go, or whether her calm demeanor had genuinely reflected a harmless character. The uncertainty created a tension that carried over into every decision he made that week. Meanwhile, the woman remained unaware of the growing investigation. She continued to carry herself with the same grace, charm, and careful politeness. Each interaction with others was measured and deliberate, designed to avoid suspicion while allowing her to accomplish her goals. She moved through the city with an awareness of her surroundings, balancing ordinary activities with the hidden complexities of her life. Every step, every gesture was part of a careful performance, maintaining the impression of normalcy while navigating the risks of being noticed. The officer's investigation continued to reveal small but significant clues. A pattern of movement, timing, and behavior emerged that suggested the woman could indeed be involved. Yet each new piece of evidence clashed with the personal impression he had formed during the traffic stop. He found himself torn between professional duty and lingering personal perceptions, struggling to reconcile the two. The tension became a constant presence, a weight that he carried as he went about his daily responsibilities. Finally, he realized that the situation demanded direct action. He could no longer ignore the mounting evidence, nor could he rely solely on personal impressions. The growing puzzle of facts and intuition required a careful approach, one that balanced authority, caution, and professionalism. He began planning the next steps, thinking strategically about how to confront the situation without causing unnecessary conflict or risk. The memory of the woman's calm demeanor and composed behavior weighed heavily on him, influencing his strategy and approach. The city moved on with its daily rhythm, but for the officer nothing felt routine. Each glance at traffic cameras, each review of reports, and each conversation with witnesses reminded him of the young woman and the unresolved questions surrounding her actions. The tension built as he prepared for a confrontation that could reveal the truth, whatever it might be. The story that had begun with a simple traffic stop was evolving into something far more complex and surprising, setting the stage for a confrontation that would test both judgment and perception in ways he could not yet predict. The night continued, and the city settled into its usual rhythm, unaware of the significance of the brief encounter on that street. For the officer, however, the event lingered in his mind. It was not just the unusual choice to let her go, but the subtle impression she had left behind. Her beauty, her composure, and her honesty created a memory that would surface repeatedly in his thoughts. He found himself replaying the interaction, analyzing her words, her tone, and her gestures. There was a curiosity, a desire to understand more, and perhaps a hint of fascination that he could not ignore. The young woman reached home safely, parking her car and stepping inside with a sigh of relief. She closed the door, the tension of the night slowly melting away.